Join me as I dive into a deep question. Do the gods of the Bible truly exist? Or let me put it another way. Could the Bible quietly be promoting polytheism? Well, listen, before I tackle this controversial question, if you're interested in taking a closer look at what the Bible really says, as opposed to the cookie-cutter, play-it-safe approach of the modern pulpit, then make sure that you subscribe to this channel. I post a new video every week, and I am committed to letting the Bible be the Bible. All right, let's get back to the question, do the gods of the Bible truly exist? Well, did you know that the most common word for God in the Bible is the Hebrew word Elohim? This word is found over 6,200 times in the Old Testament. But here's something that you probably did not know. The surprising revelation behind this word. The Hebrew word Elohim, translated God, actually suggests a plurality of gods. So, are you telling me that the Bible suggests that there is more than one God? I am. But listen, before you call me a heretic and click off this video, let me bring to your attention a well-known Bible verse that I'm certain that you have memorized and repeated many times. It is the first of the 10 Commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. Now here is the question that you will need to answer. Are the gods of the first commandment real personal beings? I'm willing to bet that you have probably never given that question any serious consideration. You have seen, you have read, you have quoted that verse so often that it's just become commonplace to you. Yet Yahweh is telling the Israelites that they are not to have any other gods before Him. So, if these gods were not real personal beings, why would Yahweh be concerned? If these gods are only idols made of stone or wood, what's the problem? Is Yahweh threatened by sculptured rock? Well, friends, Yahweh is concerned. You see this clearly throughout the Old Testament, but one verse in particular we read in Deuteronomy 6, verses 14 and 15, where God is very direct with His people. You shall not go after other gods, the gods of the people who are around you. For the Lord your God in your midst is a jealous God. Is Yahweh, the God of all creation, really jealous of an idol? Is Yahweh really concerned that the Israelites would be tempted to reject Him for a piece of wood or a slab of rock? Well, the answer is that Yahweh is concerned for His people, the Israelites. Why? Because these gods are real personal beings. So, what do we do with this information? Well, the challenge in accepting the reality of gods as personal beings begins with demystifying the concept. And this demystification begins with understanding the most common Hebrew word that is for God, and it's the word Elohim, one that is found thousands of times in the Old Testament. The Hebrew word Elohim, translated God, is one of the most unique words because it's always plural in form. Let me say that again. This word Elohim is unique because it's always plural in form. It's much like our English word sheep, which can either be singular or plural. When we see the word sheep, we do not know whether we're talking about a singular sheep, that is one, or a flock of sheep, many. If we use the word sheep in a sentence like, the sheep are in the north pasture, we now know that there are more than one sheep by the use of the plural verb are. The grammar guides us in knowing whether there is one sheep or whether there is more than one. And the same is true in Hebrew. The grammar guides us as to whether the word Elohim is singular or plural. How it is used in a sentence determines whether the writer is referring to one God or more than one God. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Psalms 82, verse 1 is a perfect example. Let me read it to you. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. Now look carefully at this verse. You'll note the word Elohim occurs twice. The first use of Elohim is the opening word, God. And this Elohim must be singular, since the Hebrew grammar has the word as the subject of a singular verb form, has taken. God has taken. So we know it is just one. The second Elohim is the word gods in the latter part of this verse. And it must be plural because of the Hebrew grammar. The preposition in front of it, in the midst of, requires more than one. Friends, you cannot be in the midst of one. The preposition calls for a group, as does the earlier noun council, because note, God is taking his place in the divine council, and then this verse tells you who this divine council is. It's in the midst of the gods he holds judgment. So one use of Elohim is singular, and the other is plural. Now, let me put this verse into its context. The 82nd Psalms is telling the reader that God is calling a council meeting to judge the gods, the Elohim, for their corrupt rule over the nations. When we get down to verse 6 of this Psalms, it informs the reader that these Elohim, well, they are the sons of God, and God is pronouncing judgment upon them because of their corrupt rule. I said, that I is Yahweh, or God. You are gods, sons of the Most High, are the sons of God. All of you, nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince. These gods, these Elohim, called the sons of the Most High, well, they are the sons of God, and they will fall. Judgment is coming. Okay, so with that background, you can readily see why this Psalms can really mess with a reader's biblical worldview. I mean, if you take it seriously, God is presiding over an assembly of gods. And immediately in your mind, you go, wow, that sounds like a pantheon. This is something right out of Greek mythology. The God of the Bible could not be possibly presiding over an assembly of gods. And for many, this is just too much to swallow. It's one of the reasons why some of your English translations blur the Hebrew in Psalms 82:1. Good example is the New Life Version. It translates this first verse this way: God takes his stand in the great meeting of his people. He judges among the rulers. It's completely butchered the verse. The idea of a plurality of gods is so concerning that the translators, that is, had to camouflage what the biblical text is actually saying. But friends, there is no need to do this. The biblical writers were not polytheist. Let me say it again. The biblical writers were not polytheist, and we're going to understand why in just a moment. But remember, these same writers, they were under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So what they're writing is something that you and I need to pay attention to. They are giving you and me an accurate picture of both the natural and the supernatural, the earthly and the heavenly. So, with that in mind, what is an Elohim? What is a God? Understanding it from the Hebrew context. Well, the answer will help diffuse and lay to rest some of the theological struggle that modern Bible readers have with this idea of multiple gods. The confusion lies with a misunderstanding of the Hebrew word for God, Elohim. And here is the problem for most modern Bible readers. When they read the word God, they read it with a capital G. The word God with a capital G causes the reader to instinctively think of a divine being with a unique set of attributes: omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscience, sovereign, and so on. But you need to understand the biblical writers did not approach the word Elohim with that kind of thinking. They did not assign a specific set of attributes to the word Elohim. Let me show you how the biblical writers use this word that's used thousands of times in the Old Testament. And when you see it in the biblical text, I am fairly certain that a lot of your concerns are going to be laid to rest. And in fact, some revelation is going to come. Some lights are going to get turned on and you're going to get excited. Well, let's begin. The most obvious and most frequent use of the word Elohim, translated God, is in reference to Yahweh, the God of Israel. You see this repeated particularly where the biblical author writes the phrase, the Lord our God, which is actually Yahweh our Elohim. That phrase, Lord our God, is common throughout the Old Testament. Let me give you an example in Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our Elohim, Yahweh is one. I kind of interpreted that for you so that you could see it for what it's really saying. Let me remind you again that whenever you see the word Lord in the Old Testament and it's put to you in all caps, capital L-O-R-D, that is actually the word Yahweh. The translators did that out of deference to the Israelites and to Hebrew people, that is, Jews, because they will not say the word Yahweh. So when the word Yahweh appears in the text, they just put the word Lord in all caps. But you need to keep that in mind. It's actually the word Yahweh. And this verse is saying, Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our Elohim, Yahweh is one. That's one use of Elohim. Here's another use for that Hebrew word Elohim. And it's used in reference to Yahweh's divine counsel, which are the sons of God. Now, I've already referred to this when we looked at Psalm 82:1, particularly verse 1 and verse 6. God has taken his place in the divine counsel. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. Note, in the midst of the gods, we discovered that word is Elohim. And then in verse 6, I said, you are gods, Elohim, sons of the Most High, all of you. So that's another use of the word Elohim. But a third use is Elohim speaks of the gods of other nations. In 1 Kings 11, Yahweh is rebuking King Solomon for his unfaithfulness. The Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel. From Yahweh, if you will, the Elohim of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods or other Elohim. So we see that the word Elohim is used in reference to the gods of other nations. Here's another usage. In Psalm 97, verse 7, the gods or the Elohim are told to worship Yahweh, to worship their Creator. But in the New Testament, the writer of the book of Hebrews quotes this same verse, Psalm 97:7, but he, that writer of Hebrews, inserts the word angels in the place of gods. And it's showing that Elohim was also used in reference to angels, or the messengers of God. Here's Psalm 97:7. Worship him, all you gods. And then when we look at Hebrews 1:6, let all God's angels worship him. So the angels, or God's messengers, they are Elohim. Here's another use of the word Elohim. It's used in reference to demons. We read in Deuteronomy 32, verse 17, they sacrificed to demons that were no gods, that is, no Elohim. To Elohim they had never known. So we see that the word Elohim is used in reference to demons. And then finally, and you're going to find this very interesting, the word Elohim is used in reference to deceased human beings. We read in 1 Samuel 28 of the meeting between Saul and the medium of Endor. And Saul is wanting this medium to bring the deceased Samuel back so that Saul can consult him. This is what we read. The king said to her, that is the medium, "Do not be afraid. What do you see?" And the woman said to Saul, "I see a God, an Elohim, coming up out of the earth." And he said to her, "Well, what is his appearance?" And she said, "An old man is coming up, and he is wrapped in a robe." And Saul knew that it was Samuel. So the writer is telling us that even a deceased human is an Elohim. So when we look at the biblical text, the word Elohim is used in reference to Yahweh, to the sons of God, to the gods of other nations, to angels, to demons, and even to deceased human beings. And here's the question I pose to you. What do all of these figures have in common? Think about that for a moment. What do they all have in common? Yahweh, the sons of God, angels, demons, the gods of other nations, or even deceased humans. Well, they are all inhabitants of the spiritual world. The Elohim are disembodied beings living in the supernatural. That is important. The biblical writer would use the word Elohim to refer to any entity that is not embodied. That is, one that does not have a physical body, and that this entity is a member of or living in the spiritual realm. So what we see with this word Elohim is that it is a place of residence term that has nothing to do with a specific set of attributes. Those beings that live in the supernatural, those beings that live in the heavenlies, they are Elohim. A biblical writer would use Elohim to refer to any entity that is not embodied. That, in other words, it does not have a physical body and it's living in or part of the spiritual realm. But here's something very important. The biblical writers made a very clear distinction between Yahweh and all the other Elohim. Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. Let me repeat that. Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is a Yahweh, meaning Yahweh is unique. Yahweh stands apart from all the other Elohim, all the other beings living in the supernatural. The writers of the Old Testament made this clear. Let me give you some examples. For you, O Yahweh, are most high over all the earth. You are highly exalted above all Elohim. Who is like you, Yahweh, among the Elohim? O Yahweh, God of Israel, there is no other Elohim like you in the heavens above or in the earth beneath. The biblical writers are making abundantly clear that no other Elohim compares to Yahweh. Why? People, Yahweh is omnipresent. Yahweh is omnipotent. Yahweh is omniscient. Yahweh is sovereign over all of creation. Yahweh is without beginning or end. And most importantly for our discussion, Yahweh is the creator of everything, including the other Elohim. So let me add one final thought as we explore this word Elohim. Some will say that these gods, these Elohim, they can't be real personal beings, and their proof, they go back to the biblical text where the biblical prophets would routinely make fun of idol making. And it's true. The prophets did. They made a light of idol makers. They would ridicule the idol makers and their idols. They would point out the obvious, that these idols were nothing but wood or stone. And to modern readers, the implication is that these gods being written about, well, they're nothing more than just man-made idols. They're just rock or stone. But people, that is not the truth at all. The ancient people did not believe that their gods, their Elohim, were merely images of wood or stone. They believed that the idols that they created, the idols that they fashioned, were inhabited by their gods. It's one of the reasons why they would perform what was known as the opening the mouth ceremony, where the mouth of the statue would be opened and the spirit of that deity would move in and occupy that idol. These ancients, including the biblical writers, knew that the gods, the Elohim, were real personal beings. But this raises a question. How did these gods of the nations around Israel come to be? Where did they come from? Well, that's a subject for another video. We're not going to take the time today to do that, but we will address that. But for now, what I need for you to understand is this. The Hebrew word Elohim, a widely common word in the Old Testament, we need to understand how that word is used in the biblical text. The biblical writer would use Elohim to refer to any entity that is not embodied. In other words, it does not have a physical body, and this entity is a member of or living in the spiritual realm. Yahweh, the sons of God, the gods of other nations, angels, demons, and deceased humans, they are all Elohim. And this word, Elohim, is a place of residence term. It's not dealing with attributes. And as we think of this word Elohim, translated God, we must always keep in mind what the biblical writers were saying. They were telling us that Yahweh is an Elohim. He's disembodied. He lives in the spiritual realm. But no other Elohim is Yahweh. The biblical writers were not polytheist, and they were careful to make the distinction that Yahweh, the God they serve, the God they worship, is unique and is above and beyond all else, because Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. Well, listen, thanks for taking time to watch this video. Let me encourage you to do something. Share any thoughts or any questions that you might have in the comment section below. I love to hear from you and hear what you're hearing as I'm teaching in some of these areas. This is a very interesting subject because it addresses and opens up to some a Pandora's box, and people get really concerned, but it's really not all that concerning when you understand what the Hebrew word Elohim actually means and how it's used. Well, again, thanks for taking time to watch, and take a moment, if you would, to like this video. And if you've not yet become a subscriber, then subscribe to this channel as well. And as always, God's very best to you.